Tony Stark is escorted by a military convoy as he crosses the desert of Afghanistan. He jokes with the soldiers, flirts with the driver, and one of them even asks to take a picture with him. But without warning, a missile destroys the vehicle in front. The soldiers get out to protect him, but one by one, they are eliminated, leaving Stark to fend for himself. He tries to escape, but a missile hits him, embedding shrapnel in his chest and leaving him unconscious. But as if things couldn't get any worse, when he wakes up, he realizes he has been kidnapped by a radical group. To understand why they did this, we need to understand who Tony Stark is. This brilliant man with a unique mind is the son of a famous weapons designer. From a very young age, he showed signs of a remarkable intelligence for technology. At age 4, he built a circuit board. At 6, his first engine, and he graduated from the world's best universities before turning 18. However, his father died suddenly, so Stark took over the leadership of Stark Industries and continued his father's legacy, making more potent, more lethal, and more destructive weapons, revolutionizing the arms industry and turning him into a celebrity. Now, all of this is being projected at a ceremony for Stark, a celebration he did not attend. Why? Because in reality, Tony is not what he seems. The genius weapons creator part is true, but he is also an eccentric millionaire, a playboy who enjoys lavish parties, luxury cars, and first-class mansions. He loves women and creating sexual tension, but above all, he loves attention. This last point is so remarkable in him that it could place Tony on the narcissistic spectrum, but I will address that in a moment. This becomes clear in an interaction he has with a reporter. She tries to interview him, but Tony responds sarcastically and sharply, thanks to his way with words. Moreover, he takes her to bed that same night. One of the most trustworthy and crucial people in Tony's life is Pepper Potts, his personal assistant at Stark Industries. She is an executive in a very important and skilled position, handling most of the administrative and management responsibilities for Tony. She literally keeps that company running, even though Tony might neglect it for long periods. Just then, Pepper interrupts him to inform him that he's late for a flight and also reveals that it's her birthday, something Tony had completely forgotten. He is so focused on himself that he doesn't pay much attention to the girl's personal life, or anyone else's in general. He's extremely late for the flight, so he speeds in his supercar. When he arrives at his private jet, instead of apologizing to the officer for being 3 hours late, he simply shows arrogance and walks past as if nothing happened. In forgetting his assistant's birthday and not caring about making the officer wait, we can notice high levels of narcissism in Tony. We also see a lack of empathy for others and an exaggeration of his self-image, as he feels his life, activities, and time are more important than others. It is important to emphasize that Tony exhibits high levels of narcissism, but this doesn't necessarily mean he has a disorder. He does have a sense of superiority, he does struggle with empathy, and he is hungry for admiration. But unlike those suffering from a narcissistic disorder, Tony does not manipulate others for his convenience and is capable of forming meaningful relationships, something a diagnosed individual could not do. He gets off his plane, greets the general, and presents the latest Stark Industries development, the Jericho, a missile with gigantic military power, capable of fragmenting into more units and destroying everything in its path. The presentation is a huge success, and Tony calls his partner and friend, Stain, to tell him they closed the deal. He gets into the convoy, and now we arrive at the beginning of our story. The convoy is attacked, Tony is kidnapped, and he wakes up in a kind of cavern. He tries to move, but cables attached to his body prevent him. He smells a strange odor on his chest, and as he removes the bandages, he realizes something terrifying. He has a metal device embedded in the middle of his chest. This device is the work of his cellmate, Yinsen, an engineer and physicist who has just saved Stark's life and who has also been captured. Yinsen extracted all the shrapnel he could and then created an electromagnet that he placed in the middle of his chest, which prevents the remaining shrapnel in his body from reaching his heart. Yinsen tells him they are captives in a heavily guarded cave by a radical group. Just then, the men who kidnapped Tony tell him they have captured him because they want him to recreate the Jericho, the same missile he just demonstrated. For this, Tony is roughed up and taken outside, where they show him the arsenal of weapons this group has acquired. However, this is no ordinary arsenal. All the weapons are the property of Stark Industries, missiles and explosives from Tony's company. In essence, he is seeing the consequences of his legacy. This, along with his capture, is a reality check, a traumatic event. The rebels tell him that if he builds the missile, he will gain his freedom, although Tony knows they are lying. But if he resists, the remaining shrapnel in his chest will kill him in less than a week. So, since the only thing he is sure of is death, he agrees to build it, and together with Yinsen, they get to work. However, as we all know, Tony is not building the missile they commissioned. He is actually designing the supersuit with which they will escape. First, he builds a small arc reactor, which will prevent the shrapnel from reaching his heart, and will also serve as an immense power source for the supersuit they are about to create. As the days go by, Yinsen and Tony become emotionally closer. The big day arrives, and the professor puts the newly created armor on Stark, and the battle for freedom begins. Tony eliminates all the enemies that come his way, but Yinsen does not share the same fate. He has been gunned down by the rebels and is losing a lot of blood before Tony's eyes, who can't do too much. Before breathing his last, his now friend gives him some final words. Don't waste your life. And after this, he passes away. Subsequently, Stark manages to get out of the caves, destroys his own weapons, and escapes the area. He is now alone, without food or water, in an inhospitable place. Although he is finally found by a group of soldiers, among whom is his friend James, Tony is taken to the United States, where the only person really waiting for him is Pepper. This is a detail that might go unnoticed, but is actually deeply revealing. I didn't mention it before, but besides handling Stark Industries' affairs, Pepper is one of the few people who cares deeply for Tony. Not for the business he has with her, or because he's a superstar, or because she'll gain something from it. She cares for his well-being, for the simple fact that he is Tony, something he doesn't always appreciate. Immediately after, Tony goes to a press conference where he announces that, after what he has experienced, he will shut down the weapons division. The journalists, Pepper and Stain, are in shock. Seeing all his money threatened, Stain talks to Tony to try to convince him not to make that decision, but he fails. The next day, Tony asks Pepper for help to replace the reactor he built in the caves. After taking it out, she asks her boss if he wants to keep the old device, but he tells her to incinerate it instead. Tony decides to start working on a second suit, but this time not for military use, but for a more personal one. In fact, as he's about to start, he exclaims that it shouldn't fall into the wrong hands. Perhaps in his, it can do good. Now we see a Tony with a completely different mission and vision. First, we saw him cancel all weapon production at his company, and now he is creating technology with the idea of doing something different. As many have already guessed, this change in Tony, as in any human being, often arises from a traumatic experience, in this case, his capture and everything he saw while he was a hostage. A traumatic event can radically change a person's perception of their safety and the world around them. For example, after an assault, a person may see the world as inherently dangerous. In Tony's case, being kidnapped revealed the result of his own weapons and nearly being killed by them. This is an emotionally intense experience, one that forces him to rethink what he is doing with his life. This is why he decides to cancel the weapons department and instead build armor capable of protecting him. Traumatic events like this will occur later on and will continue to shape Tony's perspective on the world and on himself. He spends nights and days in his workshop perfecting the new suit. Although he suffers many injuries at first, thanks to his intelligence and perseverance, he manages to have a fully functional armor. However, at this point, a problem arises. The terrorists are trying to rebuild the armor under the command of Stain himself, who is about to betray Tony. Days later, Tony receives a small gift from his assistant. It is the old reactor he created to stay alive, but it has an inscription, proof that Tony Stark has a heart. Later, Tony attends a charity event that his company has been organizing annually. During this event, two important things happen. First, Tony sees his assistant from afar in a rather sexy dress, so he approaches her to dance. He flirts with her for a while, and when they go out for some fresh air, they both lean in to kiss. However, just as they are about to, she stops. Pepper knows Tony's reputation with women and doesn't want to be perceived as just another one of his conquests, especially since they have a working relationship. So, they stop things right there. This shows us that there is definitely tension between them. The second important event is that a girl shows Tony some photographs that shock him. They are of a town massacred by the terrorists, who used weapons from Tony's company to commit these atrocities. This impacts Stark, who says he didn't approve of this. The woman replies that his company did, to which Tony responds, "Well, I am not my company," a phrase that demonstrates a total rejection of the legacy that Stark Industries has left. Back at his house, while looking at the devastated town thanks to the weapons he himself created with his company, he decides it's time to take action. He puts on the full suit and takes off towards the town where dozens of civilians are being eliminated. Here, he frees everyone from the clutches of the terrorists and, in the process, blows up the weapons that his own company had sold to this group. Once at home, as Tony takes off the suit, Pepper discovers with horror that what Tony has on the suit are bullet wounds, which leaves her very scared. Tony asks the girl to help him hack a computer in his office, but the woman, perhaps for the first time, refuses to help him. He explains that he wants the information to destroy all his weapons and do good in the world, but Pepper refuses, saying, "You're going to get yourself killed, Tony, and I don't want to be a part of it," before resigning. There is nothing clearly romantic between them, but they have spent so much time together that they have developed a strong emotional bond, which makes the responsibility Pepper feels for Tony go beyond the professional. The feelings of affection and care she has for her boss make the idea of contributing to something that could hurt him unbearable for her. Helping him move forward with his plan means accepting the possibility of his death, something she cannot accept. Tony doesn't understand. She has supported him for many years, even when he benefited from destruction, and now that he wants to do good, she refuses. Tony explains that he feels the only reason he survived is because he has a mission, and for the first time in his life, he feels he knows what he has to do. In his heart, he knows it's the right thing. He also says it's just this one mission, and that's it. He has no plans to do anything else afterwards. With this, Pepper sighs and, convinced by his words, decides to help him, but not before reminding him, "You're all I have." I'll pause here to analyze Tony's words. He himself declares that he is only planning to finish this mission, and that's it. He doesn't have a future plan in mind for his suit. He doesn't plan to use it for any future good for others. The only objective he has here is to redeem the damage he has seen directly and immediately, which he saw up close after being captured and witnessing how his weapons hurt innocents. However, this action is motivated more by a need to correct his own visible mistake than by a general commitment to good. Remember this short-term vision that Tony has, because it will be important. While all this is happening, something shocking is revealed to us. Tony's own partner orchestrated the entire capture and assassination of Stark to take over the company. Stain steals the plans for the first armor from the leader of the group, murders them, and returns to his country to build his own suit. Stain arrives at Tony's house, paralyzes him temporarily, and removes the reactor that keeps him alive to insert it into his new armor, which is finally finished. With the little strength he has left, Tony finds the reactor Pepper gave him and puts it on, saving his life. Now more stable, he puts on his suit and goes out to defeat Stain. At the boom time, Pepper is at the same place where Stain begins to execute his evil plan. But when the man is about to finish her off, Tony arrives to save her life, kicking off the final battle. After many blows and near-death experiences, Tony, with a little help from Pepper, manages to make the reactor explode, finishing off Stain. Days later, everyone is talking about what that metal suit was that some saw the day the reactor exploded. Something like an Iron Man. Tony has to go out and give some false statements to the press to calm things down a bit. Agent Coulson gives him the cards and tells him to stick strictly to them. This agent was helping Tony and Pepper throughout the story, as he is interested in Tony joining an initiative called SHIELD, but we'll see more about that later. Before going out, Tony fantasizes with Pepper about the idea of being Iron Man. Tony goes out to face the press and read the papers, which state that he was rescued by a bodyguard in the suit. Just then, a reporter interrupts him and says it's too convenient a coincidence to be real. Consequently, Tony defends himself. But I want you to pay close attention to his response because it is extremely revealing. He says, "It's one thing to question the official story, and another thing entirely to make wild accusations that I'm a superhero." The reporter reveals that she never said he was a superhero. Realizing his mistake, Tony is left speechless. At this moment, Tony has just experienced something known in psychoanalysis as a Freudian slip. This is an act that manifests an expression different from, and even contrary to, the person's conscious intention. The slip can present itself in an action, a gesture, or, as in Tony's case, in speech. By saying, "make wild accusations that I'm a superhero," Tony reveals an internal desire to be seen and recognized as a superhero. But it seems to me that beyond being seen as a superhero, there is a deep hunger for recognition and attention. Plain and simple. He doesn't really want to be a hero. He just wants to be perceived and admired as one, which feeds his marked narcissistic side because it makes him feel even more important. This slip in his speech is more than just a mistake. It's a window into his internal desires and conflicts. Tony's ego can't take it anymore, and instead of reading the papers, he stops for a moment and declares, "The truth is, I am Iron Man," causing the press to explode in surprise. Now, it's true that Tony did indeed act like a hero by dismantling the terrorist group and freeing the town from their clutches. But, as I mentioned before, it seems to me that this was less about a heroic act and more about Tony clearing his conscience. For the moment, that was all from my side. I am aware that Tony will still go through many other things. If you would like me to continue and make a series of Tony's entire evolution up to Endgame, leave me a like and a comment.